There is a lot going on when Bran and company arrive at Bloodraven's cave, which makes it the perfect place for George to hide little revelations towards the magic and world building that he doesn't want to completely explore just yet, but he wants to lay them out there so that everything is logically consistent when we're all looking back through the story upon a reread. Now, we have just spent a couple episodes talking about the fallout of the major revelation from Leaf after she rescues them and takes them into the cave. But the main topic of today's video is actually the very act of them entering the cave, because there are two pieces of magic on display there, which I think are very important for proving my theory of how the wall is created, and give us some good foreshadowing into how the wall's magic actually works. Even how it could in fact be brought down by the Horn of Joramun. Now, if you're new here, you've got a lot to check out after you finish this video, but if you're not new here, you will be very familiar with how I think the wall was built. To cover it quickly, I believe there are giant weirwood trees which are grown in a straight line, basically coast to coast, that their roots reach all the way down into the underground rivers and waterways that George is constantly reminding us are there. These trees all seem to connect to every weirwood tree in Westeros and seem to function as sort of a world tree-like organism for, at the very least, Westeros, if not all of the planet. And in fact, this world tree seems to have been corrupted in some way by the building of the wall, and it's a whole big issue that is probably going to have to be dealt with. The main point for what we're talking about today, however, is the idea that the wall itself is structurally a big wall of weirwoods which pump water up through themselves, excrete it out their pores, and then it is frozen there on their trunk and on their branches, and therefore, if you're the Horn of Joramun, what you would in theory want to do is have these trees shake apart, knock all the snow and ice off their branches, and therefore bring down the wall. And if you do it that way, the wall can be brought down by the Horn of Joramun, and the process would lead to the wall naturally rebuilding itself, which makes sense of the legend of the Horn of Joramun being completely believed by all the free folk, yet the wall is still standing today, so how was the wall brought down, and yet it's still there? Well, that explains it all. So, in addition to believing that the Horn of Joramun has some magical spell to make the trees shake all the ice and snow from their branches, what we have also got to recognize about the wall is that it's a magical barrier. Really, once you're looking for similarities between the hill that the entrance to Bloodraven's cave is on and the wall itself, the similarities are incredibly obvious. Especially once you know that the wall is made of weirwood trees covered in ice, because the hill is described as a giant hill covered in trees which are themselves covered in ice and snow. I will read for you now the very beginning of the chapter where they arrive at the cave. Something about the way the raven screamed sent a shiver running up Bran's spine. I am almost a man grown, he had to remind himself. I have to be brave now. But the air was sharp and cold and full of fear. Even Summer was afraid. The fur on his neck was bristling. Shadows stretched against the hillside, black and hungry. All the trees were bowed and twisted by the weight of the ice they carried. Some hardly looked like trees at all. Buried from root to crown in frozen snow, they huddled on the hill like giants, monstrous and misshapen creatures, hunched against the icy wind. So the entirety of the hill itself is described as trees covered from root to crown in snow, and then when they look at the entrance to the cave itself, because it's so cold there that they can feel that something is wrong, and coldhands can sense that the others must be nearby, there must be some sort of trap, and they can see the way to the cave, and it looks clear, and coldhands is like, no, it's not, they're here. Now, when they point out the actual entrance to the cave, it is described as warded, and it is warded so that coldhands cannot enter, but he also says that the wights couldn't possibly be in there because it's warded, so it reminds you of the wall, in that coldhands, who couldn't pass through the Black Gate, also cannot pass through this entrance, and obviously we are getting a similar ward function going on here. That becomes very relevant to my theory when you realize then that the entrance to the cave itself is a hole in between the roots of a couple of weirwood trees that are up on the hill. So basically, you are passing through a tunnel between two weirwoods. And if the ward is functioning similar to the wall, that really makes sense because I speculate basically every tunnel along the wall is somewhere between two weirwoods in this big line of warded weirwoods. So you may be asking, how does George manage to show us all of the similar magic to the wall and how it functions without us picking up on it? Well, he decides to throw it all in the chaos of a massive battle, of course. He has the trap be sprung, the wights start springing up out of the snow, just like they do in the television show, and Meera is actually dragging Jojen behind the rest of the group in the books because he's so weak from not having eaten in so long that she has to basically haul him up slowly. Hodor and Coldhands and Bran are all up ahead with Summer, and Hodor has his ankle grabbed. He stumbles, falls down the hill. Bran is knocked out of the basket, so Bran is laying on the hill, and he's dragging his body towards the cave entrance, and he's about 50 or 60 yards away. Hodor has fallen further down the hill. Coldhands is surrounded by wights and fighting off as many as he can. Summer is out there doing the same thing, just biting and attacking wights everywhere he can, trying to protect Bran. In all of this chaos, Bran eventually wargs into Hodor's body, and he is using his sword to fight off as many wights as he can, trying to protect Meera and Jojen, and they are all making their way up to the cave, while everyone generally is ignoring Bran's body. Then, obviously, in comes Leaf. She starts setting wights on fire. Everything is going absolutely crazy. You're wondering, is anyone going to survive? Who is setting the wights on fire? What's going on? What's actually inside this cave in the first place? And, of course, is Bran going to survive? Because Bran, from the POV of Hodor, looks back at his own body laying limp face down in the snow and wonders what happens when the wights get to him. If he dies, his body there, if it dies, will he stay in Hodor forever? Will he go into Summer? Will he just be dead? What's going to happen? We, of course, don't get to find out what would happen if Bran's body was killed, because then what happens next is the back-to-back magical revelations that I think are incredibly important and very well-hidden clues. When Hodor crosses the magical barrier, when he passes directly between these weirwoods and enters the cave, Bran, inside his body, is kicked out. Here's what it says. Everything turned inside out and upside down, and Bran found himself back inside his own skin, half buried in the snow. The burning wight loomed over him, etched tall against the trees in their snowy shrouds. It was one of the naked ones Bran saw, in the instant before the nearest tree shook off the snow that covered it and dropped it all down upon his head. The next he knew, he was lying on a bed of pine needles beneath a dark stone roof. The cave. I'm in the cave. Literally, George has shown us back-to-back magical effects that are relevant to the wall so fast that I couldn't even take a break in between reading both of them. The way that Bran is kicked out of Hodor when he crosses the barrier is basically exactly like the way that Jon and Ghost have their bond cut off when they are on opposite sides of the wall. This is exactly what you would expect to see if the wall is in fact exactly what we have been speculating, a giant wall of weirwoods that is warded in the exact same way. It is probably built with a very similar magic, and that's why Coldhands can't pass either one of them, neither can either of the wights. Now, I think we all probably recognized on some level that Bloodraven's cave and the wall have a similar magical ward, but the wall of weirwoods blocking the entrance to Bloodraven's cave, I think is very relevant given everything we've discussed. The next thing that is incredibly relevant that I had completely forgotten about is what happens right after Bran is kicked back into his own body, and that is that he is about to be killed until a tree magically shakes all of the snow and ice off of its branches on command. Now, I would speculate it is either Leaf who has issued this command, or it is the Weirwoods themselves, using like the mycelial network that connects all trees, which is a thing for real, and then potentially using some magic aspect of that exists in Westeros to get all of these trees to shake their branches down and knock all the ice and snow off, which, again, that is the exact spell that you would expect to be in the Horn of Joramun. So George may have literally just given us a full-on demonstration of the magic that is woven into the Horn of Joramun, and we had no idea. The magic of the ward that protects the wall and the magic of the Horn of Joramun that can bring down the wall were literally both just on display in the same exact paragraph, and many of us missed it because the other thing in that paragraph was a flaming naked wight that is standing over Bran ready to kill him, and then right before that, they spend several paragraphs under attack, and right after that, they are suddenly in the magical cave meeting a child of the forest, so much so that you're going to forget anything that just happened, and that is how you expertly hide clues that you don't really want people to pay attention to until a reread. So when I say that viewing the wall the way that I view it in what I've covered on the channel and how I think the wall was built, when I say it makes more sense of these books, when I say that looking back at things you suddenly get more information out of them, this is what I'm talking about. The entrance to Bloodraven's cave is a perfect example of this. Now, the revelations within Bloodraven's cave go further than that, obviously, and one other one that is directly related to the wall that is deeper within the cave is when Bran is walking as Hodor, and he sees a line of singers in a room entangled like Brynden, and their eyes follow him. These creepy old green seers who are woven into the trees, who are married to the trees in the way that Bran will be one day and in the way that Bloodraven is now, are still alive. They are bound to immortality in the exact same way that we speculate the people crucified to the trees within the wall are. Now, I have speculated that these people who are crucified within the wall are bound to both the Weirwoods as a method of icy immortality, and to glass candles as a method of fiery immortality, and it is the marriage of the two that is binding them as an incredibly powerful magical power source to this eternal undying. And it is, in my opinion, nice to have both the ice and fire method of immortality there, because it's a song of ice and fire, it's nifty, and George seems to, at least in his mind, have an idea for a fiery method of immortality, in addition to the Weirwoods, so I think it'd be cool if both were involved in the magical ritual, and then the television show shows us something that seems to involve what could potentially be a glass candle and a Weirwood, so it all just seems to work very well for me to have them both there. But what we're given a pretty clear sign of here down in Bloodraven's cave is that you don't necessarily even need both. These things are bound to immortality simply by the Weirwoods themselves. By being former Greenseers, they look to have been bound to eternal life, staring, following the torch, one of them even opening its mouth like it's trying to speak to Bran. If that thing could talk, do you think it would ask for death? In the same way that we think that maybe the Undying ones in the House of the Undying were asking Dany for death, were begging to be freed in the same way her slaves were, which is why in their vision she sees the slaves and then they turn into the Undying in like a one-for-one shift, because the Undying also need to be freed. These eternally living people probably want an end to this eternal undeath that they are bound to. Now, I don't know if this is going a step too far, but the Weirwoods are named after Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead, and if you have the Grateful Dead, what do you have to have before you have that? Well, you need the ungrateful undead. They're these people who are undying, and they're not happy about it. So in the end, they will be the Grateful Dead, which is kind of funny. Is that the actual pun that George was going for when you realize that the entire story might be about these people who are bound to the Weirwoods and are begging for death? I don't know, maybe. It certainly seems like that could be something that kind of makes a track where he's like, oh yeah, Weirwood, that's a perfect idea, because the Grateful Dead, and the story is about some people who want to die. Now, potential Weirwood puns aside, I think it is very clear that these things that are strapped to these trees in the same way Bloodraven is are still somehow alive. So you have a line of trapped, forever undying beings, which is another similarity that I believe this thing shares with the wall. The entirety of Bloodraven's cave and the hill that it's on is like this ancient weirwood structure in the same way that the wall is. Now, I think we actually have a direct name for what this exact type of weirwood structure is called, and that is a secret tree town. The tree towns are supposed to be where the children of the forest lived, besides caves and the hollow hills and the cranog, but the tree towns, in my opinion, seem to be the most important. These seem to be the well-protected fortresses of the children of the forest. These seem to be the places where their green seers are, which is what they base their societies around, and these are the places that are incredibly well protected by magical wards in the same way that you would have people building, say, a giant castle protected by huge stone walls. So yeah, I speculate that Bloodraven's Cave is very obviously an old tree town. It is a big hill covered in trees, and then there is a giant structure underneath it that is magically protected where the children of the forest live. We may have to talk more about tree towns in the future, but that's a whole nother big rabbit hole that is going to have its own entire video, because I am still recovering from the revelations that we have gotten just upon entering Bloodraven's Cave, which we have covered over the last 3 videos. So just to quickly recap, the 3 main things of this video that I think are really relevant to the wall: the entrance to Bloodraven's Cave being magically warded in the exact same way we see the wall warded, and the fact that it is physically a wall of weirwoods that you pass between. Then, what happens to Bran when he is rescued by a tree shaking all of the snow off of its branches, being very likely the same exact spell that is woven into the Horn of Joramun to cause all of the trees in the wall to shake the snow and ice off of their branches. And then finally, the seemingly undying ones who are strapped to the roots of these weirwood trees could very well mirror the undying ones who are also within the wall, meaning that just all over this cave, all over this weirwood structure, we are getting tons of signs of what's actually going on with the biggest weirwood structure of them all. That is, of course, the wall. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found these passages from Bran's entrance to Bloodraven's Cave as interesting as I did, and hopefully you feel like you have learned something about tree towns and the wall and the weirwoods and how George is setting up all of this magic for us. If you have enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you all with something else very soon.